She's serious.
Hi, Marilee.
Hello. I can't tell you how frustrating that is. I finally had to turn my iPad off and turn it back on. And then it got Neil's email with the new link. Ugh.
I know.
Are we ready to start?
We are, Chair Woodrow.
Thank you. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Springfield Economic Development Agency to order and have the Neil call roll, please.
Board Member Van Gordon.
Here.
Board Member Pitts.
Here.
Board Member Moe.
Here.
Board Member Rodley.
Here.
Board Member Stair.
Here.
Chair Woodrow.
Here.
Board Member Pictionary.
Here.
And Board Member Burney. Here.
Okay, I'm going to begin by reading the instructions. As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There is one time designated for public testimony this evening and will be listed as business from the audience. If you are joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during that time, please use the raise hand feature. When you are called upon, please state your name, ward or general location, and the subject you would like to speak about. The order of public testimony is as follows. Anyone who has raised their virtual hand, anyone who has submitted email in advance, and if there is remaining time, Neil will read those emails into the record. First item.
Chair, your first item is business from the audience. And as you mentioned, we'll allow folks to put their hands up in using the raise your hand feature.
Yes.
And currently we have one speaker, and that speaker is Daphne Mantis. And Daphne, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
I'm Daphne Mantis. I live on West D Street in Springfield. I appreciate that SEDA is beginning the search for an appropriate developer. My hope is it results in a partnership with a developer who prioritizes the values and guidelines set forth in the Glenwood Refinement Plan and the Willamette River Greenway Plan. As I understand it, in a request for qualifications, SEDA must, at a minimum, state first the speciality desired, second, the qualifications a developer must have in order to be considered, and third, the evaluation factors and their relative importance. And as to this ranking of values and priorities, SEDA should embrace the values and priorities of the Glenwood Refinement Plan, which was over a decade in the making. The top amenity identified in the plan is the Willamette River. The top priority in development is to connect both visually and physically with public access to the Willamette River. The Glenwood Refinement Plan envisions a riverfront linear park. It envisions development that takes a scientific approach and uses best practices in riparian restoration, setbacks, sustainable landscaping, and water resource management. As to the first criteria, SEDA should seek a developer with prior comparable development experience in a riparian area, specifically river frontage in the Northwest. As to qualifications, SEDA should seek a developer who has an in-house land use consultant with demonstrated expertise in ecologically sound river frontage development. And as to the priorities, the third criteria, as I said before, SEDA should partner with a developer who prioritizes the values and standards set forth in the Refinement Plan and Willamette Greenway Plan. I expect SEDA to encourage green developers to apply and to encourage maximum competition for this project. And I trust you understand the importance of your role in the preservation and stewardship of this beautiful part of the Willamette River.
Chair Woodrow, our next speaker is Ben Cooper, followed by Eric Marvin. And Ben, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hello, my name is Ben Cooper. I live at North Brooklyn Street at the edge of the site of the proposed development, and I'm speaking about that. I just wanted to say that I'm glad that the session on June 14th will have some attention to community partner input and broader engagement. I hope that that implies that you will equally consider input from residents in Glenwood, especially us here who will be directly affected. I hope that we can give input that will be useful and also considered seriously. That would be much appreciated. And I also just wanted to say that I really appreciate what Daphne had to say. Thank you for that, Daphne. And that's all. Thanks so much.
Board, your next speaker is Eric Marvin, followed by Kevin Shaper. And Eric, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to, well, first of all, Eric Marvin, my family and I own the tract of land directly to the east of the SEDA-owned property. And I wanted to let you all know that we do believe that a catalyst or anchor use is critical to make a Glenwood project successful. And we believe that an outdoor arena that can double as a venue for professional sporting events and concerts is the best amenity to allow the public to embrace the river. So we do believe that that type of use or element should be included in the plan. And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Kevin Shaper. And Kevin, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hi, I'm Kevin Shaper, and I live in Ward 2. I didn't really prepare a comment, but I've been listening to comments all along, and I think it's difficult with a housing project. You can't get public comment from the future, from the people that will live there one day. And I think you really have to sort of consider who they are and that they're important too. And I know that the counselors understand we need housing at all levels. And I think it's really valuable and important that not just 200 affordable units, but 300 other units could be built. And aside from the tax benefit, I'm pretty indifferent to a hotel. But if a hotel subsidizes affordable housing, I'm in favor of it. Thanks.
Chair Woodrow, that appears to be our last speaker.
Okay, next item.
Next item, we have no correspondence. So your next item would be under old business. That's item number 1, the Glenwood Riverfront request for qualifications preparation. And Courtney Griesel is here for the staff report.
Before we do that, I have some comments I would like to make.
Okay,
Okay. 3 of them actually. All together, by the way. At the agenda review meeting last Friday, we talked about the process we're going to be going through tonight for talking about applicants for the SEDA property in Glenwood. I didn't say much, and afterwards they asked me what I thought, and I said, I'm sitting here looking at this screen, and you guys talking about a situation. I predicted 2 years we'll be doing the same thing. We've been going through this process for years, and we're still only at the talking stage. Glenwood is my community. I grew up in Glenwood. I still call Glenwood my community, and my neighbors who live there probably will not like to hear what I'm going to say, but Glenwood is dying. It's dead and needs something to to be done, and now is a good time to start. Glenwood came under Springfield jurisdiction in 1999, and immediately they went to work on what is called the third Glenwood Refinement Plan. It was adopted and is in place right now. That plan had 13 visioning goals. I don't have time to go through them, but they allow for a mix of uses suitable for unique development opportunities in Glenwood. The Glenwood Refinement Plan, since it was originally produced around 1985, has been updated twice, and every update was a public involved process with citizens from Glenwood, Glenwood businesses, Springfield businesses, and Springfield citizens at large. It was a big deal. Each refinement planning process took years to produce and dozens of meetings between citizens and staff, and lots of citizen input and public hearings. I get going too fast, sorry. This particular area we're talking about, now called sub-area B in the refinement plan, is designated for flexible commercial and high-density residential development. In response to developer interest and market demand for hospitality, which means hotels and other company commercial uses. It also says riverfront views and accesses as a complementing agent for urban high-density mixed use. Developers have been submitting proposals since November, and the response has been minimal. The proposals are the results of thousands of hours and many hundreds of thousands of dollars in follow the refinement plan. One proposal has tried to answer questions to get to the point where they have satisfied the needs for the development. They need answers, and the communications become stressed. Then they are told they will have to go through a whole new process. I understand their stress. In March, it was made public that proposals can be submitted and reviewed by staff and presented to the SEDA board. I'm having a lot of problems with the direction SEDA has been led. We have had staff present us with their interpretation of proposals, and I'm troubled with some of the information we have received. One of the proposals doesn't have a developer. Are you kidding? Anderson Construction, one of the biggest contractor developers in the Northwest. I'm particularly troubled by the information given by staff and the reputation of some members of the two proposal groups. I'm even more troubled by the fact that most proposal groups don't know that information, have not been able to give their version. Even more so, SEDA has been asked if we want to do business with people like that. The meeting was virtual, and I could see members change. Another was that both groups failed to disclose some information. Again, we're not able to ask why. It could have been intentional or just not remembered. It was implied by the last request for proposals that evaluation would be done, and we would select a proposed developer to continue negotiations. Remember, both proposals were given a date for submission. Why didn't that mean anything? One other option, simple. Sell the property to a developer. One of them is ready to purchase. Make the purchase contingent that the buyers follow through with the proposal and follows the Glenwood Refinement Plan and build in 3 years, or we take it back. This doesn't have to be a SEDA controlled or designed project. That's not our business. Our job is to help acquire properties that appeal to developers so Springfield and Glenwood can build new housing, generate jobs, commercial businesses that fit into our new future. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Next item, Courtney.
Okay. So good evening. Appreciate that feedback. I want to make sure I give the board any time before just jumping in here. So, ultimately our evening is really framed in working through the initial stages of drafting a request for qualifications as a mechanism to respond to the board's desire to move forward and selecting a developer through a competitive process. We have brought in some assistance this evening. Lorelei Juntanen is on the call, and there she is as well. And then Nancy will also be assisting intermittently, as well as Abe Farkas when needed. I want to pause for just a moment before I kind of talk about our outline for the evening, and also do an introduction with Lorelei to see if there's kind of any feedback or setting of the stage from Nancy as we move forward. I don't mind kind of starting that, but I also didn't want to jump right in without a moment.
I think Joe has a comment before I say new.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Marilee. I said I apologize. I thought Courtney was inviting comment. I do have a couple of things, but it doesn't sound like she was. It sounds like she was introducing you.
It's fine. No, if you do have comment, that's fine.
Oh, okay. First, just a correction, Neil. I think everybody else got a letter from Mike Eister, and you said there were no letters on the record. So I don't know if that was just because it was sent to us or what, but I got that. I think we all did. Number two, my understanding, correct me, Courtney, if you would, or someone correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is our last public meeting, we left it saying we were going to look at 2 proposals and propose the developers and select one. And maybe I'm wrong, but if there hasn't been a public meeting since then, in your remarks, it sounds like you're presuming a different direction before we make a decision.
So the board direction was to pursue forward with requests for qualifications. In one of the last public meetings, there was discussion and consideration of what we might do with 2 of the proposals that were brought to us voluntarily, but those were not brought in a public process. So with board's direction, with leadership direction to move forward under a request for qualifications process and to do so very quickly, we're setting that up to begin now at this sort of earliest meeting.
Okay, again, I'm sorry, and I will be quiet on this point. I didn't think we made a decision. I thought we talked about it privately in executive.
We can bring up Christina Kraz if she's available, but I think we had direction from the board provided. I can bring her up. Oh, thank you.
Oh, hello, board. This is Christina Kraz, Assistant City Attorney. So in an executive session, a public body cannot make a formal binding decision. However, the proposals that were sent by advocacy to the board were not part of any formal process and were not bound to result in any decision. And the board can provide direction to staff both in public meetings and outside public meetings on the content of agenda items for future public meetings. So there is no legal requirement to adopt a decision to select a proposal because there was no request for proposals that's bound to result in a decision. It's the same manner in which an interested citizen who makes public comment to the board says they would like the board to do something. The board can discuss and consider that idea, but it is not part of a formal legal process that's bound to result in any particular decision. And so no formal decision is legally necessary, although it is at the board's discretion how you would like to take votes to document actions going forward. I hope that was clear as mud.
Clear as mud, and it covered the ground, to quote Harry Belafonte. No, it was good. I'm going to say one more thing, and it'll be my last, because if not, I will suffer the wrath of my dear friend Joe. There have been, I don't know about legal, ethical, or binding, but there's so many processes at play here, I'm confused. There was a process begun 3 years ago, which we've talked about, I don't have to hammer it, but where people were told that an RFQ was going to be sent out 3 years ago. There was a process by which people were invited to propose to us, and that ended up in our last public meeting and subsequent executive committee. There was a process by which the mayor and I were going to be talking to the different proposers and hoping that they would reapply. And we haven't even done that. We've done part of that, but we're concluding that next week. Which to me, you kind of need the consideration of finishing the process. Now I'm here, there's going to be another process of RFQing it out. And I've learned there will also be a process where there's facilitation, et cetera, in a public meeting making a decision. That's where my confusion is. And I don't see any of those processes moving too quickly. So Christina, thank you. And I'm done. I don't want to interrupt the flow anymore, Courtney. I apologize.
I think I see Councillor Steer with his hand up, Chair Woodrow.
Yep,
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on what Commissioner Burney was saying. I might just be thick, but it seemed to me that we had not really made any sort of conclusion, even at the executive board meeting. And it does seem to me, in the interest of transparency, if we are even going to be giving guidance right now, I think we should be doing it in public as opposed to in the executive session. That's all I got.
We're not in executive session.
Right. No, what I'm saying is that if we gave guidance during the executive session, then in this public forum that we now find ourselves, I think that it would be advisable and probably and would be much more transparent for us to give that guidance now, as opposed to in the executive session that we had.
Okay.
Courtney, you went through a timeline in our last meeting of how the developers came to us. We had not put the property out for a bid or for ideas or anything like that, but the developers came to us, and how we got from that point to this point.
Sure.
Would that be helpful to go through this? Because you were responding to the developers, but it was not a formal request for proposal per se. And so maybe it would help.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to. And so I think for starters, there is some discussion about there having been a process about 3 years ago. There was a process initiated, but it was stopped by the board to consider an alternative project that would have run counter to that process. And so we did pause on that. And I think Commissioner Burney, you were actually on the SCDC board at that time with the alternative project. So we provided that space. That took about 2 years really of evaluation and work. And so we, last fall in November, we did have an interested group. Well, we had one of the interested groups introduced to us with and asked that we work with them to understand what their ideas were and proposals were for developing the SEDA property. We had not actually put out a process or requested interest. And so during that request, which was at the end of November, it was also asked that we move very, very quickly to evaluate that, which we brought it to the board as best we were able, but not under a framed process. And so that really did put us in a position of trying to be responsive, but also trying to organize priorities and understanding at the same time. So I do think it is important to acknowledge that we have not actually done a formal process on the property, and we are just now closing on some of the last parcels even. And so this would be the first formal request for qualifications and public sort of procurement process used by the agency. I think that those details are important, and I think we do have to figure out, we can bring up, we can start on this discussion about what a request for qualifications looks like from a best practice standpoint. And in this meeting, the board can decide if they want to continue moving forward in that work to define an RFQ. I do see some hands going up. Mayor
Sean?
If you had a thought you wanted to finish before I went, I don't mean to cut in here.
No, it's okay.
I guess where my head's at, and I'm not interested in going into a big discussion about content and discussions that we've had at executive session, because it's still framed up in executive session, and some of that contains proprietary information, and I want to be sort of conscientious and sensitive about the fact that we're financials and all sorts of things. My feeling here is we need to choose something, and we need to and then we need to go with it. We're bouncing way too many times back and forth. There was no and this is my take, there was no process that led to these two folks coming in. Nobody should see that as a judgment on these two projects. I think the two projects are great. We're lucky to have them. And we need to formalize the conversation about how we're going to come to a decision as a board, because frankly, right, like that's what it's going to take for Glenwood to go forward here. I'm interested in starting this conversation, and we bounced to the track, then we bounced to these two projects, and we've never taken a step back and said, what do we want as a group of elected officials for Glenwood? How are we going to get there, and create a framework to actually help decide so that we can build cohesion across the board. So I'm interested in diving in. I don't feel like there's a need to really jump back and rehash a bunch of this stuff, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Corey, did I see your hand? Okay. Was there anybody else? Okay, Courtney?
Okay, so I think the goal at this point is we'd go ahead and start into the agenda item and really talk about the plan for this evening, which ultimately is we do want to revisit briefly the refinement plan elements and talk a bit about what a request for qualifications looks like in a best practice structure. How are communities engaging in issuing RFQs? What do they look like? What do they typically include? We have identified, we've set this meeting to occur over 2 meetings, one this evening and then one June 14th, really because we want to be mindful of time, of your time, but also we know it's a decent amount of work in both settings. This evening's kind of priority focus would be about the themes. So really, what does the board see as the priority themes and uses on the SEDA owned site specifically? This is important to us because it tells us ultimately the type of developer that we are marketing to or looking for. And then what's that order of priority? So we have brought in a facilitator to help us with this discussion. Lorelei will be with us for this meeting and also June 14th. June 14th being when we hop into the detail to really talk about, so what is the logistic of an RFQ process and selection look like? How do we approach engagement, both community engagement, but also community partner, service agency partners, neighboring property owner partner engagement. And then really when you get into the actual selection process, what would we expect? So that would be the themes for kind of both evenings, with us really focusing on the themes and uses of the site this evening. I do want to introduce Lorelei a bit. Lorelei Junton is with ECHO Northwest. We've asked her to facilitate the conversation. Lorelei really works at ECHO focusing on public investment and policy work and development partnerships and how that work impacts development outcomes in communities. So this is an area where she's facilitated a lot of these conversations with agencies across the US before. And since they are complicated themes, our hope is that she can not only facilitate this conversation, but help us pivot quickly as we're talking about different elements of the RFQ. And then we have Abe also on the call to assist. Chair?
Very basically, we're looking at coming up with priority themes and uses, what we see in the development of that area, that we can put into an RFQ that goes out and says, this is what we're looking for.
Yep.
Is that so that's what the basic premise of this conversation tonight is to get everybody's focus on what our priority themes and uses are for that particular area.
Yep. To get us moving in the right direction and using the right tone.
And provide a framework for the RFQ.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Lorelei, I'll ask you to kind of hop in and take over and introduce yourself a bit.
Yes, I'm happy to do it. Hi, everybody. I'm Lorelei Juntonen. Courtney, thank you for the introduction. It is true that I have spent a fair amount of my professional life having conversations with urban renewal agencies about how to move through complicated redevelopment processes. I'm actually not a formally trained facilitator, so you don't have to expect a lot of that kind of touch and approach, which can sometimes feel a little touchy-feely. But I do have a fair amount of content expertise and the benefit of fresh eyes on this situation. I don't have the years of history that I just heard you all going through. And so I'm happy to, my main goal here is to facilitate us through to exactly what Chair Woodrow suggested, which is a common understanding of themes for the site, as well as what we think criteria should be for selecting a development partner. But I'm also happy to, if it's helpful, bring forward some of the experience that I've had in similar kinds of conversations in other places. Sean, I think you said it pretty much exactly the right thing. Is the point is to try to figure out what we want as a group of elected officials, so that there's not this bouncing around that keeps happening, that each new idea doesn't sort of twist and turn in a new direction, that instead there's a cohesive vision for really what we want to see specifically out of development on the site. So that's what we're aiming for over the course of these next couple of meetings. I told you I'm not a trained facilitator, but I do think it's really important to start with these sort of ground rules conversations. This is what you're seeing up on the slide here for discussion principles and outcomes is what we're hoping to accomplish at a high level. First of all, we want to make sure that we're giving staff what they need to be successful in putting together an RFQ. Second of all, we're trying to move quickly here and we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and a lot of work has been done, and we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of that. And building from those past agreements and plans. I'm going to be working to help us try to identify the areas where we clearly do have consensus, where there's a common vision. And then where we don't have to resolve that tonight. We don't have to try to figure out if there are places where there are disagreements or there's a lack of consensus. We want to try to understand where that lack of agreement is coming from and why it's there, but we don't need to resolve it tonight. We can bring that forward again at the next meeting, and or even allow staff to figure out what the resolution should be through the remainder of the process. So I just want to pause for a moment before we jump into the remainder of the agenda that Courtney gave an overview of there, and see if there's any comments or disagreements with this high-level overview of what we're trying to accomplish. And I can't see all of you. Maybe I can if I do this. Yes, I can see all of you now. Leonard, I see your hand.
Thank you, Lorelei. So my understanding is that we're going to be given some questions that we're going to be polled on, just in order to provide some guidance on the direction that we need to go in the future. So I wanted to ask, is there any way to conduct this poll in a way that allows the public to know which counselor chose which priority? I'd really like to err on the side of transparency here, if we possibly can.
I would say we actually intentionally moved away from that just to allow for you all to feel comfortable saying whatever you would like to say as your priority. However, there's no reason that you can't own your own choices in the verbal commentary that goes along with the polls, if that makes sense.
So there's a window for verbal commentary?
Yes, we'll be talking about the results of the polls. The polls are they're not votes. They're only intended to help to identify places where there's clear agreement and places where we need to have more discussion. It's just a quick poll to take the pulse of the group, not a decision-making tool right now. As soon as I saw the attorney pop on, I knew I had to clarify.
Real quick. Votes of the board do have to be public, and each counselor or board member's vote has to be known to the public. So any binding decision that is made by law has to be public as part of public meetings law. But that doesn't apply to sort of polling, or you can think of this like sticking your sticky dots on the board of your priorities in other meetings. Where,
No sticky dots.
That's exactly what this is. This is a virtual version of a sticky dot exercise because we can't all be in the same room together right now. Okay. Other questions? I still see your hand up, but I think maybe you just haven't taken it down yet.
Right.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. So The next item up in that case is for Courtney to just do, going back to that principle around not reinventing the wheel and reflecting on some of the public comment that we heard at the beginning, a very quick flyover to remind us all of the Glenwood Refinement Plan and what's included in that.
Yeah, and very, very quick is definitely the nature here. This really does reflect a lot of what, Councilor Mo said and what we heard from others as well. What you see here is a visual timeline of the involvement process, the community engagement process of the last refinement plan update. It was multiple years. The process of drafting it ran from 2008 to 2011. I don't have to tell a lot of you that because you were along for that adventure. Ultimately, once we completed it and you all approved it, the state took a couple years with it and acknowledged it in 2014. But I think what's really important for us is that there was a community advisory committee that met many times over the course of those years and were really dedicated to the work and provided some recommendations directly to the council, which the council took and codified into that refinement plan. And so this image just kind of shows you that amount of time and those meetings and that engagement over those years. And then as we move into what that created, ultimately, Laura, if you want to advance the next slide, that's where we start to see what it looks like in an actual land use plan. And so those recommendations were a mix of uses that really prioritized connectivity, access to green spaces and the river, quite a bit of housing, specifically in that northern corner where we're talking about this evening being a high density residential area. And then some of those themes more specifically on the next slide, Lorelei, get us into really policies that make sure we are connecting to the river, that there are plenty of open space and parks, that when developed, things are aesthetically pleasing and they fit the context of the area, that it's not just a building plopped out of the sky onto land without thought, that when there's a mix of uses that they're suitable to Glenwood. Next slide for me. And so that gets to the point about housing, where really the plan really outlines it's all housing, not just one type of housing. And that when we're putting housing in, we're doing it in a way that's a steward to the open spaces, to the environment, the natural habitat, and also the safety of the residents in Glenwood. And it also tells us on the next slide, we just hit on the fact that the site is served by safe and convenient and walkable transportation systems. It's connected, and all of these elements are framed up in land use code. And we bring it up only because it means we don't have to decide all these things through a request for qualifications process. Ultimately, this vision, the community directed vision, is now codified in the recent update. And so a developer who's qualified and comes in and develops to that refinement plan is developing within the framework that has already been guided by the community and the council vision. The other element that I will note is that we do anticipate some refinement plan amendments may be needed to facilitate development. This is a large site. Sometimes roads are not just quite right, and they need a refinement plan to adjust, or setbacks are just not quite right, but they're almost there, and a refinement plan amendment is what's needed to adjust. Or uses that weren't anticipated suddenly come into existence. So that's one piece to acknowledge, that if an amendment is needed, we would not outright consider that as a reason that a development couldn't come to fruition. So that was a really fast way to sort of touch on that refinement plan. But I kind of want to get a sense, we want to make sure we share that there is a good plan and code in place, and revisit all of those pieces and how they came to be. And so before we kind of move into the actual meat of the topic, any questions on the refinement plan? Okay.
Okay, you're all pretty familiar with that, so that's great. We also wanted to just take a couple of minutes and have Abe, who has done this work across many, many communities in Oregon and in other places, share some of the hard-won lessons around why you would need an RFQ, what works well when you're trying to put one together, and where there are some pitfalls. So Abe, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what a typical RFQ process looks like and what typical criteria look like.
Yeah. Thanks, Courtney. And Lorelei.
You're welcome.
Good start. Okay. I want to go to the first slide. Yeah, thanks very much. So these processes that we're going to be talking about in the various selection criteria are actually drawn from some best practices that the ULI has prepared. It's the Urban Land Institute. I served on their public-private partnership council for many, many years and have a great deal of experience in the public and private sector, collaborating with and working with folks like Lorelei and others. So this isn't something that we had invented just for tonight. So the comments that were made earlier about the importance of having clear goals and purposes by a board are absolutely essential. Developers are going to ask for that. Developers are going to want to know how aligned the council is behind those goals. Having a set of clear plans is also important. So the first step is that. And I think on the slide that I'm looking at here, we have staff is then directed by the council to issue an RFQ. And it's preparing and issuing an RFQ involves doing some homework. And fortunately, the staff in Springfield has done a lot of the homework, understand very well the site conditions, the context, the planning issues. So that's pretty easy to put together. Going out and issuing the RFQ means also cultivating the development community and getting some of their input prior to the formal issuance. Once the RFQ is issued and you got a time frame and criteria involved, then you have a committee, which could be your staff, could be staff plus a member of the community, a resident of the urban renewal area, a business in the rural area. You get to make those kinds of decisions. The committee will end up reviewing the proposals and then ranking them. The top 2 or 3 proposers are proposers that would then be vetted by the staff. Staff would do reference checks on them, in some cases do site visits to check out their projects before making their suggestions to the board of usually the top, again, 2 or 3, where the board would conduct final interviews and then make a determination about who it wants to work with. Are there any questions to this point? If not, I'll go on. Okay, and in an effort to be as expedient as possible. So once a selection has been made, then you enter into the MOU and disposition development phase. A MOU identifies the key deal points that the public and private entities that are involved will move forward on once they finally get to a development disposition agreement. In some cases, developers and cities are interested in skipping the MOU, going to a DDA, and that's something you can decide later on. The selected developer is going to want to make sure that they have a good understanding of the refinement plan, how it works, what adjustments would need to be made. And again, you can identify those key issues during an MOU process. Then you have finally the negotiation to conclude a development disposition agreement, which ends up binding both of the parties. Once you complete that process, you can go to groundbreaking and at least celebrate the initial steps.
Hey, Abe, can you talk a little bit about how long an RFQ, just this top line of selecting a developer, typically takes?
Yeah, that often takes anywhere between 4 months and 6 months, depending on how much work has already been done by the staff and how much needs to be done. So it's often helpful, for example, to have a market analysis completed, because the developer will want to understand, any developer that's looking at the city is going to want to understand what's the market for the various uses that have been identified by the board. So if a board is interested in market rate housing and affordable housing, they're going to want to understand that. They'll want to understand the context. Who are the surrounding private property owners? Can we work with them? Have they expressed interest in collaborating with us? Those are, again, some of the steps that have already been taken by the staff, but there are others that the staff may want to delve into more deeply. So those are the kinds of elements that could affect the length of time. Environmental impact statements are another one that could impact the time frame.
And Courtney, not to put you too much on the spot, but I know that there's already been a lot of work done on this site.
Mm-hmm.
Does this feel like one that would move faster than what Abe just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's squarely in what Abe just described, probably on the faster end of it in that sort of 5-month window. But we are considering updating the market study that we had done in 2019, since the market is sort of a different beast. This work session and the next one in June will be very important to that work too, and very much frames the actual drafting.
Okay, and I did see a hand. There it is. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
There it is. Here it is. Thank you very much.
There you are.
I'm
And
sorry.
found the mute button. Good job.
Thank you very much. It was the accomplishment of my day. First, I want to apologize when I blanked out. That was Representative Holvey, the community benefits bidding protocol for all public entities in Oregon is getting real close. It's in his committee. I apologize. It wasn't meant to be rude. By the way, I saw Richie Weinman today, and I told him I'd probably see you because you seem to be engaged in all these, and he said to say hello, so hello. That's one process, right? That's sort of a government-centric process that probably is often followed. There's another process. And by the way, I'm not trying to be a fly in the ointment. I just really believe in engagement and vetting things and going through things. And I probably too much want to see housing and affordable housing and jobs and revenue. So there's a passion there that I apologize for. Another process, and I'm asking this question, but I would think another process would be for us to figure out what the hell we want to see there. Abe, I think you've been engaged for a couple of years on this. And then see who is ready to buy the property at the highest price with a variety of clawback provisions that relate to environment, community input, all of the things that you talk about, construction capacity, how things are moving, that enables SEDA to purchase back the property if any milestones are not met. Is that not also a process that could be employed?
So
yeah,
and I'll flag briefly that it is a process. There are a couple different ways. In either case this evening, where we're really framing the themes and kind of priorities, is still important, whether it's the themes and priorities of a buyer or the themes and priorities of a development partner. But I'll let Abe jump in as well on the many different ways.
But I totally concur with what you said, Courtney. That, of course.
Right. So to Joe's point, you can do that. You could take that approach. My experience with that approach, and I've seen it done in Portland, and I've seen it done in other cities, it often falls short of finding the right developer, given the kinds of goals, community expectations that various cities have. One example is we did that once in the city of Portland, went right into bringing a developer into land that the Portland Development Commission owned. The developer had actually a very intriguing concept, but unfortunately the timing was awkward. He put together a concept that was focused very much on capturing tech industries in the core area. Then the 2001 bust came, and that developer ended up tying up the land for 10 years. It took that long to have the public sector extract the land. So not necessarily a good experience. Another one is the city of Bend went through a very rushed situation, selected a developer for Juniper Ridge. The developer presented very striking conceptual images of what could happen there. That developer did not have public-private partnership experience, didn't really know how to work effectively with the community. Again, tied the city up for a 2 or 3 year period, and the city spent $2.5 million to extricate itself from that. So
okay, so
it
you
just-
had a couple of bad experiences.
yeah, and there are, I'm sure, positive examples, and I know some in some cities, but just given the time that you've already invested in trying to get the best possible solution. Go ahead.
And I'll just say this because it's a concern. When the mayor and I met with one of the groups, and they're wondering, honestly, and at this point, I'm not pro any group. I'm just pro something happening. There, because the nature of opportunities and funding, right? We wouldn't have this opportunity without that structure for this size of an investment. And I'm just concerned that people are going to make business decisions to pull out, to not continue to spend their money and speculate if they don't see a path toward a transaction closing, factoring in all of the public inputs and all of the public needs. And that's my concern, truly. And when you mentioned 4 to 6 months for this initial process, I'm seeing that they have to pay any opportunity zone fund in the United States has to pay a tax event in 2026. They have about 3 years worth of construction time at this point, and not even dealing with the pre-construction stuff. So there's a clock that we also just need to factor or consider as we're moving forward to even have the opportunity for one of these two to move forward, modified as the public and we may want.
I think the flip side of that argument, though, is that taking the time to get very clear in this very first step about purpose and goals can actually help to make the entire process smoother and more certain for developers. So, there's two sides to every coin.
Absolutely, Lorelei, and I understand from Councilor Moe that lives in Glenwood that we've spent 38 years on it so far.
Yeah.
Okay,
let's talk a little bit about how we find that that ideal development partner and what that process looks like. Abe, can you walk us through this?
Sure. So now we are going to address some of the typical criteria. So what you'll end up putting together in your RFQ would be looking for a basically master developer. This is someone who understands both the horizontal and vertical dimensions of development. The most important player in the development team is the developer. The developer could surround herself or himself with wonderful architects, landscape and vertical designers, strong engineering and construction companies. Those are all changeable. You are best off finding a developer who has got previous experience, again, in both the horizontal and vertical side, in large part because you've got a lot of horizontal property. You're not just looking at a one-off development. And those seasoned master developers also will have an experiential base with, ideally from your perspective, looking for one with projects that are similar to this. I think I heard in the comments that were made in the public session that the most important attribute you've got is the river. I think that's an excellent point. You would be best served by bringing someone in who's had previous experience working as a master developer on a riverfront redevelopment project that involves considerable open space and a mix of uses. As you're beginning to probe for that in the selection criteria, you'll want to look for various capabilities of that developer in their experience. How did they partner with the city? What have been their total development costs? You want to see photographs of actual completed projects, which is also incredibly important to you, know that they've really happened. And then sometimes you want to ask, what's the timeline that it took for them to get from a completion of a development disposition agreement and the land turned over to the first building, which you're going to be quite concerned about. So, you'll want to find out a great deal about the financial capabilities of the development entity that you're selecting. And that includes the developer's previous experience in securing debt, what kind of equity was put in by the developer and the developer's partners, what kind of public funds were put into the project. And again, getting examples of somewhere between 2 and 5 projects from a developer. You want to probe the actual public-private partnership experience of that developer. How has that developer worked with the public partners? What have been the roles and responsibilities of each of the partners? What kind of public outreach was done during the process? And then finally, it's good to tease out from the developers, not in any kind of architectural drawings or renderings, but to get their preliminary sense of how they would approach the Glenwood project. What are some of their general ideas about how development might move forward? Again, these are all elements that I think are going to be very important in your selection criteria.
Okay, questions or comments about that? Okay, we'll keep moving then. I think this gets us to the fun part, which we've already talked about a little bit. So I'm going to stop sharing, Courtney, so you can pull up the tech. This is the part of the meeting where we pretend that we're all in one room and we've got a flip chart, and I'm going to write some stuff and you're going to put some dots up, but we're going to do it virtually. And the purpose of this, again, is not about making decisions, but it's instead about trying to identify places where we know we have areas of agreement so that staff can take this and move forward with actually developing an RFQ. And we want to talk first about the kinds of uses that you would like to see on the site and make sure that we understand what those are. And then we would also like to talk a little bit more about the criteria for selecting a development partner. So those are our 2 goals. Courtney's pasted a little link into the chat window.
Yep. So you'll go into the chat. I've got a couple warm-up questions and maybe lighten the mood a little bit and pull us into something silly just to sort of test the tech. So you will click the link in your chat. And that will navigate you to a quick poll that you can populate. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because it will share results live. And if you're on an iPad, what you do is you go up to the section that says more to identify chat. It may navigate you away, but we're also here to assist with any tech if you need it. Just kind
And Courtney, I voted on this one, so your numbers are going to be off. I'm sorry. It was too exciting.
No, it's totally fine. My favorite's that other guy, a girl, whatever their name is. Yeah, and so what's great about this is it just gives us kind of a quick visual. I'm also going to advance forward to another survey here in a minute. Got a couple more coming in. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think I'm waiting for 2 more folks. Is anybody having, this is a good time now if this is not working real well, because then.
Oh, at least one Bart fan in the group. That's good.
I don't have anything.
If you hit refresh on that, does it help?
I'm gonna try. Where's refresh at?
Or go back to the email link from earlier. It'll be the same tech link.
I've lost everything now.
Would you like me to resend that email? Would that be helpful?
Guess so.
Okay. Gonna resend that briefly. I apologize for the delay and appreciate it. This is why we did a silly question first, was just to.
What if you don't know a single Bart character?
That's why that other one, whatever that character's
Yeah.
name is.
Good.
Let's make it till you make it.
I answered the right one.
Okay.
So if this is filler time, I have a Simpsons story.
Great, let's hear it.
Okay. When I was flying to LA back and forth every other week, the woman who's the voice, I wish I could. think of her
Yardley
name.
Smith.
Yes, thank you, Yardley Smith. She was always on the flights.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out why. And then one evening, the Springfield policeman, who was her security, who ended up being her partner, was at the airport consistently. And then when I saw them embrace one another, I realized why. That's my story.
Very good. That's a Springfield specific brush with fame right there.
It sure is. Especially when your kid's on the police force and knows the guy.
Didn't she meet him when she was up here for the mural?
Yes.
She did. He was her detail that
Yeah.
weekend.
And the rules were he couldn't have a relationship.
Did that work, counselor? Because I saw numbers change.
I believe so.
Okay. So just to kind of make sure we're all in a jive here, I'm going to give us one more. And
Oh, that's easy.
is it?
Well, if you own a broccoli processing company, it is.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. All right. Did that advance for everybody okay, though, or it kind of automatically prompted?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm questioning the run on Brussels sprouts here, though.
Oh, yeah, they're a
One of the
great
few
thing.
vegetables I hate.
And I'll tell you that garlic does in fact count. It is a root vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that got a vote
Right, and Brussels sprouts are great when they're grilled.
with garlic and rolls.
I like them deep fat fried personally.
Lots and lots of garlic, like so much garlic you can't taste Brussels.
Any guess who voted garlic?
You-
Yeah.
That's right. Okay,
Looks like you got everybody,
I
Courtney.
think we did it. All right, I didn't know if we had any other. So now we're going to actually move into the meat of the meal, if you will. Pass the
I'm
rolls.
getting hungry and
Okay,
it's past 8:20 and I'm starving now. Thank you.
you're welcome. So this is where we're actually going to take a run at just sort of an initial poll or sense of some of the themes. And this is not a vote. This is just a discussion, and it creates a visual for us. And then Lorelei will jump into what does it mean?
Can we vote for two?
I think
It
you
says
can
up to
vote for
three.
three.
Up
Okay,
to three.
thank
It's
you.
more than the vegetables.
So we're gonna, while you're thinking about that, what we're doing right now is we're just taking an initial pulse on it. And then we are going to have a discussion about things that might be missing from this list. So if we see that other line get really large because you don't like the choices, and try to fill out a couple of additional things. And then we're going to take another run at it again with a revised list if we need to. So this is just step one.
I think we're almost there.
Almost in order. I'm gonna put my slides in order of what you've got here.
Okay, do we have everybody in?
Yes.
All right.
You can add the percents and figure that.
Yeah, it's got a little.
There it is. I knew we were waiting on one because our little person at the bottom. So I'm going to drop my screen here because I think this is sort of that visual to start the conversation. Lorelei, do you need, but I will be keeping
got
this
it.
for folks.
Yep, I got it. So fantastic. So I'm just curious to hear you all talk a little bit about why you selected what you selected. It was pretty clear that there were some clear winners there, housing and event facilities at the top of the list. Why those were at the top and why some of the others were at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see the same PowerPoint we were looking at before, but I'm going to edit it as we go. So you can pretend that you're looking at a flip chart and just my handwriting is magically amazing and you can read it all because it's perfect block letters. Anything missing from that list? There were at least a couple of you who had other. Go ahead.
Did one of the earlier public inputs discuss sports venues?
Yeah, that would fall into this category.
Okay.
That would be what, that is one example of what this could be.
Oh, really? Okay. So clarification, when I looked at event facilities, what I was voting, just me, what I was voting on was conference center, right? Those kinds of events. So maybe a little more granular down the road.
Yep.
Yeah, because I was looking at that as being,
There you go.
yeah, a gathering place, a community gathering place, sports event, so yeah, we were looking at it from two different perspectives.
Okay, we can make it two separate. We can have sports venue and conference center as two separate things if you want. Sports venue. I don't go to a lot of sports venues myself. I'll just totally expose my own lack of knowledge about how those are called. Okay, let's go through that. What about housing? When you all, those of you who identified housing as a top choice, which was many of you, were you thinking about market rate housing, affordable housing? What did you have in your head when you selected that?
I thought mixed.
Yes, so did I.
Thanks.
So did I, mixed.
This is Leonard. I was thinking primarily affordable low-income housing.
And we have two developers, each of which have embraced housing. One seems to have a little more detail than the other.
Mm-hmm. So the reason to get real clear about this, if we haven't hit you over the head with this too much already tonight, is both so that it can be clearly communicated in the RFQ and developers know what they're getting into, but also for the sake of being able to distribute the RFQ appropriately to developers that have the right skill set and background, and can think about the mix of uses that you're really interested in on the site. So we're trying to really get focused as much as possible for that purpose. Was there anything missing? Yes, Councilor Joe.
So I'm going to say it again. People keep throwing out that word affordable housing. What is the definition of affordable? I'm just looking at, I believe every housing should be available at different price points, so it's distributed amongst the different wage earners and creates a vacuum for people to move up to, as opposed to nothing but very low income housing where there's no place to have for any upward mobility. So affordable to me could be a family that can buy a $250,000 house that they can afford based on their income. It may not be affordable for other people, and other people may consider a $120,000 house affordable to them. So what's affordable? Is it based on mean income? Is it based on property, mean value of housing?
Yeah,
we keep throwing that out there.
This is a totally important question for us to get clear about. Does this group, when they say affordable housing, mean capital A affordable housing, which is rent restricted and available for people based on their incomes? Or do they mean what I think is probably meant by mixed income housing, which is housing that is affordable to a range of different incomes?
Well, I'm guessing with this group, you're going to have very low cost, low income housing, and then you're going to have other folks that believe that not the higher end of housing, but middle housing is as important. So
Mhm.
you're gonna have to get that. Good luck defining that.
Leonard, you are the one who brought that up. So how about if you
Yeah,
clarify?
I think Councilor Pictionary is bringing up an excellent point, and so I would like to withdraw my suggestion of affordable housing and turn it into workforce / low income housing, which is pegged to median income in the area.
Okay. So that would, in order for it to be considered affordable, though, would still need to have some sort of rent restriction on it to make sure that people income qualified, but it might not be very low income. It might be more middle income.
Right, and I think that he's raising, Councilor Pictionary is raising a good objection. I would just eliminate the word affordable entirely and just substitute workforce / low income.
And I can get behind that 1,000%, Leonard.
Only 1,000?
At least. Same thing with you, Joe.
What?
And I'm getting ready to I'm starting to get a little bit hangry here, so people need to start rolling.
I hear you. I can do that. I think I saw one more hand, but now I don't. Are we? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I'm a mix and range of housing in, especially if we talk about something that's subsidized. I wouldn't want to see, like, I would expect everything to sort of be mixed all together, and that could run all the way from what you would think of as, income restricted units all the way up to a premium product, right? Just having a wide mix and wide variety of housing units.
Okay, fantastic. Councilor Bernie?
Yeah, I agree, mixed from low income to penthouse, but we really, so I agree with mixed. But in terms of affordable, text from my son. Someone I know flipped an average house off Harlow, bought it for $360, asked $460, sold for $600. That's the environment we're in. So whatever level of housing, there's a shortage, except at the high end right
Mm-hmm.
now. There's even a shortage at the high end right now.
Yep. Okay, so other comments, and we can just very quickly pull on this again and give you a chance to change your answers, especially given that we've clarified what we meant by, what did that say before? Large event center. Let's do that. I'm feeling the need for momentum. Let's do another poll here, Courtney.
Just dropped that back in there, the link, in case it's convenient. And let me bring it up live. Okay, are you all seeing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because it's more fun when you see what I see.
It is fun to watch them come in, all the little bouncing bar charts.
Some web designer did a good job. Looks like we've got a couple more folks. And if anybody else, got one out there.
It's interesting to see that large parks and outdoor features went, I think that went up from the last time, did it not?
It just a little bit, 17% to 19% this time.
Okay, well, that might not be significant. That might just be general shifting. Okay, I think we have a clear pattern here. Oh, we're missing one. There it is. There's the final one, just like that. Yeah, so we did see a jump in parks and outdoor spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone want to very quickly talk about that?
I feel strongly about the parks and outdoor spaces for two reasons. One, the location of the property. I would like to respect the where the property is and what's there. And as much as we can have large parks and outdoor spaces, I would like to accommodate that, along with whatever the development ends up being. But I also feel strongly that way in the response to the people that we've heard from that want those parks and want that outdoor space. And I think it's really important to maintain a semblance of that. I mean, we have part of our community that's asking for us to really consider that. So I think it's important to be part of it.
Okay.
I agree completely with Councilor Woodrow, and I also agree with Daphne Manis, who spoke in the public section. The Willamette Greenway Plan calls specifically for a certain amount of public space in between the river and any development that takes place.
Mhm.
And I think we should honor that.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
I also, even though I really don't like being outdoors because of allergies and being in the Army too long, I do appreciate, places with large pavilions that you could potentially rent out that could provide a source of income for Willamette Lane. You can have large events. I think Springfield misses out on, large cultural events to Eugene because they have larger spaces. And I think, sorry, I keep bringing up growing up in Memphis, but right on the Mississippi River, we had Tumbly Park and their barbecue cooking contests. I think now they have basketball courts as well as like little workout sections, things that kind of spray water on children or whoever in the summer. And so I just think that it could not only be a great communal space, but it can also be a source of revenue. And we will be able to host large like cultural events. And once again, as we look to change the cultural landscape, that'll make people actually want to move here and stay here. It's small things like that that don't really exist that if we bring in, will make people want to stay and bring different types of businesses this way.
I agree with Damien.
Okay,
So,
fantastic.
I guess the feedback I would give is, I kind of bounce between sports venues, conference centers, and sort of parks. And I think that when I think about it, I think that there's got to be an economic feat, like a three-legged stool. You got to have some sort of economic catalyst that this is all built around. So am I necessarily, going to go down, fight to the mat over whether or not it's a sports venue versus a conference center? No, but I think we just have to have some sort of centerpiece, if you will, would be the way I would describe it.
Yep, that is actually really consistent with what I'm hearing through this discussion.
Yeah.
Which is that it's some sort of gathering place that is a cultural area of focus for crowds that are larger than can gather in other areas, whether that's in an outdoor space or in a sports venue or in a conference center.
And I just wanted to add a piece for me, and I also am all for having the conference center, public space, definitely public space along the river. One of my motivating thought processes around access in terms of wanting as many people as possible to have access to it and to help to sort of set the stage for if we're thinking of this as a pivotal first development, sort of set the stage for what comes after. Having as much housing and people being able to have access to the river as possible.
And across the river, I still have a hope for a shuttle that goes back and forth between Glenwood and downtown Springfield.
Okay. All right, let's keep this moving. Let's talk a little bit now about.
I think real quick, we've got a couple Joes with their hands up. I think
I'm pretty sure I was first.
I think you were.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I think people are forgetting something here that we've been talking about, and it was a #1 council priority as an indoor track, an events center built in Glenwood, and that is still there. And I don't think we should forget about that, because then all of a sudden we're starting to talk about competing type facilities, which I think there's room enough for both type facilities in Glenwood, just one across the street and to the south. So just wanted to remind folks that everybody here thought that that was a great idea, and all of a sudden everybody seems like they've forgotten about that. So I don't want to forget that. I still think it's a great idea, and I still think we have room for a sports/indoor track facility.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You just go ahead. You works for me. So
I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce everybody's name. So
I know mine is hard. It's pronounced Joe. Anyway, you know, this is a continuing discussion, which is good. But may I just add a few other points? One, I think we need to look at cash flow for the city. What creates revenues that we can reinvest in our people and our parks and our services, et cetera? That's a kind of a lens, if you would. There's another lens which we haven't discussed, and that's sustainability. That's where's the energy going to come from? To what are the carbon emissions going to look like? How are the developers proposing to mitigate that? There's another theme, Damien, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's another theme that really is a diversity theme. It's more of a diversity than necessarily an equity, which is looking inside of organizations, but it's how do we create places where multicultures want to be and congregate? And finally, I think within the development proposals we've already received, each would be willing to negotiate those things, which is, again, I know I have this bias towards doing it, but each is willing to negotiate those things, and each, there needs to be tremendous amount of community input, and each, I think, and if not, need to negotiate that, increases public access to the river, increases park space, increases open space. So I just think we're real close.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. And just as a quick reminder, we're not making decisions specifically about what uses would go on the site at this point. We're just trying to get clear about where we have some obvious areas of agreement, and there will be an entire RFQ process and developer selection process that will help to clarify and focus that. We're just looking for what's in and out here. So I think we've got a pretty good sense of that. Abe, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to speak to Joe's point a little bit. I think if sustainability is a high value by the community, and I think it should be baked into every community's RFQ and RFP processes. It'll be important to state that for the development community. There are a number of very capable master developers with a great deal of experience with sustainable development. There are others that, quite frankly, they're not quite so experienced. So it's a good way to help tease out those who are from those who aren't, and help you reach a decision you're maybe more comfortable with.
Yes, that's an excellent transition to a discussion about selecting a development partner and what kind of criteria you might be using to do that. Before I move us on to that, any parting words on uses? No, okay. So we're going to use the same process that we used before. We're just going to do a really quick poll on a starting place set of potential criteria. And Courtney, if you want to go ahead, and they should use the same link, I assume,
Yep,
to do that?
you should use the same link, and it actually may have already prompted with new questions. Awesome. Thank you for the confirmation. It's always a little bit like in the dark when you're. So again, this is like a first run at it, just for discussion, and not a vote, but.
And one more really important thing to say on this is that all of these could be listed in the eventual RFQ, and all of them may very well end up being listed in the eventual RFQ, but we'll want to weight them. So you should be thinking about this not as which ones are in the list and off of the list, but instead which ones should have the heaviest weighting when you're going through the evaluation process.
I think that's all of them.
Yeah. Yep, that's great. That's a good starting place.
Do you want me to drop my share?
Yeah, just a sec. Let me make sure that I'm remembering where we're sitting. Okay, I think I've got it. And I'm seeing some good other categories too, which is helpful for the next discussion. So you can go ahead and drop your screen. I'm going to pull my screen up and we can have another conversation about what else you all might have had in your minds when you were thinking about the characteristics of a development partner that were not on that list, and a little bit about why you selected the ones that you did as having the heaviest weighting. I'd also be curious to hear if there are any that you would not include at all, but everybody picked at least, every one of them got picked by at least one of you. So it didn't seem like there was anything that should be off the list. What did you have in your mind when you selected the other category?
I think one thing that I thought about is like the percentage of, minoritized individuals that work, are there women, are there racial minorities, are there veterans, are there people, of alternate abilities, because I think that a diversity within a team can affect the overall project. And so those are some of the things that I really thought about the most. And then to kind of piggyback on that, sometimes it's good to pick somebody who has tons and tons of experience, but then how do you give that other team that is looking for a chance, but is reputable and potentially will hire a lot of our local citizens versus bringing in a whole bunch of other random strange folks.
Thank you.
And I think that's important. How is the community going to feel with this team? And so sometimes having, sometimes a 250 bottle of wine isn't as good as the box wine. And sometimes you gotta go with the box wine because it's fast more people. I don't even drink wine, so I don't know where that came from, but
It goes right up there with the Brussels sprouts. I think we've got a theme going tonight.
You cannot combine Brussels sprouts and wine.
Can I bring a bottle to your next meeting?
Okay, those were great additions. I also will just say this would be a place for the sustainability issue to show up as well, if we would like to see that included as a criteria. Yes. Joe.
I just want to back up Damien's point in a different way. What comes first, the person that has a ton of job experience or giving them their first job? I know I'm in the minority. I disagree with the master development team. I disagree with a lot of this stuff. Some of the most exciting projects I've worked on were different groups getting together and creating the capacity because they had a passion and really wanted to do a project. So I'm just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that comment would emphasize this criteria over some of these others. Yeah. So shall I add sustainability based on that previous conversation?
Please.
I'm seeing no's and yeses at the same time. Joe, would you like to talk about why you're saying no?
Because that's a whole different topic that has not been discussed, and it hasn't been discussed with Springfield leadership before. And it seems to be that is being applied as some sort of mission in this from this group. And I think it needs more discussion.
Yes, Leonard.
I would favor including diversity of the development team. I think that it's important to have that perspective in the teams that we select for these projects.
I thought you were talking about sustainability. That's a different subject, right?
Or
I was asking.
Are we talking about sustainability now?
That's what I was asking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would be for sustainability too, as a matter of fact.
I'll go ahead and put it on the list. We don't have to vote for it when we go back again.
I think with so many of these things, we really need to define our terms when we move forward.
Yeah. And that might be why there's some disagreement with that as well. I mean, I think there's a wide range of what's considered sustainable, from, paying attention to the sort of basics of building construction materials and, where you're sourcing them, all the way on up to trying to have living buildings. And we would definitely need to refine that more through the negotiation process, but to have some experience with at least paying attention to sustainable outcomes in the design process seems like a criteria that I have heard through this conversation. And if nobody wants to give it thumbs up, we will take it off. Okay. Couple thumbs up. All right, very good. Anything else missing?
What was thumbs up?
To the concept of including sustainable design, at least at this high level right now.
How many thumbs did you see?
I saw 3.
Okay.
And we'll run the poll again too, so we can see what that looks like in the end.
Okay. It's not that I disagree with it. I just think that we start throwing on all kinds of different requirements. This project is going to be harder and harder and further out of reach.
Right.
And oh, by the way, Damien, I do support what you're talking about, is making sure that, or trying to make sure that the team has got some diverse elements to it, because I agree it is going to throw in a bunch of different stuff that we're not used to.
Okay, I think we might be ready for poll number 2 here, Courtney, if you are ready for it.
I think I am. Should have just prompted you all forward. Now we won't know if you prefer dots or Mentimeter. We'll
Yeah.
have to take a poll on that. I'm just really exhaust your excitement about polls.
Can we do it with dots?
That'll be the first thing we do when we get to come back in person.
Really interesting.
I didn't have a chance. I screwed up, so you don't have my vote. I apologize.
Do you want me to resend it to you?
I just have this thing on my screen. I've been punching buttons, Courtney. It says Mentimeter.
You had it. Can you refresh? Will it let you back in?
You probably will. I'm not smart enough to do it.
Slamming down all the keys, Joe. You're voting for everything.
Thank you, Courtney Griesel, for this public humiliation. Yes, it was.
That was awesome.
Yeah, I figured you'd like it.
Heck yeah.
Okay. So maybe while you're working on that, this one did have some really big shifts as a result of the discussion, and I can see the shift happening to some of these new ones that were added around diversity and in particular supporting local businesses and workers through the process. Interested in the no votes on the preliminary approach and ideas. I think on the first time around, we had some that were there. Anyone want to talk about that at all?
What does that mean?
Yeah. So the idea would be, what does that mean? Maybe that's why no one voted for it. Yeah, so the idea behind that as a criteria is that in the RFQ, you would request some information about how they're thinking about approaching the project itself and what kinds of ideas they have for development. And then you would be weighing those ideas in that approach.
Didn't we get that?
Well, we haven't issued this one just yet. I think that what we're looking at is a little that and other items that we might include in this process.
Yeah. Yeah.
But based on this, it looks like we really have that look about the approach or how they use local business and workers when they go into a community and the diversity of their team and maybe their policies.
Yep.
And then a lot of interest in master development, like experience and capacity, and maybe some of their work around sustainable development that they've done.
Yep. Yep. Abe?
Yeah, so yeah, this is really very, very helpful. And it's good that you're having a very healthy and robust discussion about these. As I look at these, I don't see any reason why all of them could not be included somewhere in an RFQ process. Often a lot of this kind of information is presented in your purpose and goals, as well as the explanation of the context that you're asking developers to enter into. So again, healthy discussions, I think, help to expand some of the thinking here.
I agree. I think this was all very helpful, and will be a really useful starting place for the discussion at the next meeting, when we dig a little bit more deeply into the role that the board will have, what we want to do around community engagement, and then really what the process will be for selecting a developer going forward. And we'll start that last meeting with an attempt at summarizing all of what we have just heard tonight, so that you all can tell us where we got it wrong, which we inevitably will have. So that's an overview of where we're headed with this. I felt like that was a really healthy discussion. Thank you for your time. Now I feel like I'm wrapping it up, and I'm seeing a clear comment coming in from Joe Burney. Do you want to jump in?
Yes, I want to talk to see how pissed off I can get Joe Piscineri. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I don't know if anyone knows this, but I love Joe. I really truly do. Okay, I think whatever we decide, since we're going down a road, I personally think is going to take too long. I think we need to say, if in 3 or 4 months, or whatever the time frame is, we don't get to a selection point or whatever, that we look at a fallback, which is option number 2, which is integrate all of this planning into criteria and putting it out to bid and negotiating everything that the public wants.
You're suggesting that as a fallback?
I'm suggesting that if this becomes a bridge,
Oops, you muted yourself. We can't hear you anymore.
Perfect. Oh, sorry, Joe.
I knew he said, I was trying to unmute before Piscineri could talk. What I'm saying is that as a fallback, not in replace of, that after a certain period of time, which we predetermine, if this becomes another bridge to nowhere, as has occurred in Glenwood multiple times, that we agree that we'd rather see something happen than nothing. We'd rather integrate all of the input we receive through this RFQ process and community hearings and public hearings. And we got to sell the land to a developer so something can happen, with multiple clawback provisions if they're not moving the way we want them to.
I think I would propose that we will make some notes, and we maybe talk about that. We could talk about that in the June meeting as well.
I just have a request. After listening to this and listening to the meetings we've had before, looking ahead to the 14th of June, where we're going to make more coherent, that's probably not the word I want, but more detailed specifics for the RFQs. I would like to have everybody come to the June 14th meeting with the idea that we're going to get this done. We've had too many conversations about what didn't work, what didn't happen, what didn't come to the foreground. I would like everybody to come with I don't care if it's a fantasy land roller coaster, come to the meeting on the 14th of June with the idea that we're going to get together, we're going to make it work. We've all got our own ideas, we've all got our own feelings, and that's wonderful. But I just feel like we're at the point now where we just have to look at it and say, we've got to come together. We've got to come together. We've got to decide. Each one of us isn't going to get everything we'd like to see, but otherwise we are going to just continue to go on and on and on and on. And I just think it's a point now where when we come back on the 14th of June, we come back with an idea of we're going to make something work. We're going to make this work. Whether it ends up being Joe's fallback, but we've got to come away with, we've got something that we're going to go forward on.
I like the roller coaster idea.
Thanks, Joe. Steve?
Thank you, Marilee. I've been so pessimistic. I'm glad to hear you say that. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Courtney, I think it's to you. I think we have a sense of where we're headed for the next meeting here and are just at the wrap up phase now.
I think I just appreciate you all hanging in and sometimes just speaking the truth, pessimistic or optimistic as it was. And I also have to acknowledge that we haven't done this before. So this should have felt different because the board hasn't made it. This is a first kind of moment where we've taken refinement plan, which is lovely and somewhat academic, and we're trying to sort of apply it into now what. So I appreciate the work. I appreciate the honesty, and it was a little messy, but it actually created some clarity from my standpoint. And I think Lorelei and Abe's, as we're now putting our heads down and starting to get ready for the 14th, and also getting the RFQ documents ready. For us, as we just kind of move into that, the next week, the 14th, will focus more on the structure, and we can incorporate some different ways to get to the same ultimate end, which is that we select a partner that embodies the things you just talked about. And whether they're a partner in a joint development, a purchase, a rocket to the moon, I don't know. The element is that we're just really talking about getting out there and finding the right partner in a way that makes sense and keeps us moving. So I appreciate the time. And I also appreciate you letting us play with the polling app and the patience. Any other questions for us? I see Councilor Pitts.
Yes. I think this was great. It was kind of cool, but I'm wondering, there's been so much talk about listening to the citizens, and is there a way to get a poll like this posted on the Springfield City website to where it's accessible to specifically Glenwood residents, but then just residents of Springfield, period, and so they can actually have a chance to see what we talked about and actually kind of, but as opposed to doing like top 2, if possible, do it like if we have 8, rank them 1 through 8. That way they can actually truly have a chance to affect our input, and we can see how we align with those that we represent.
I think it's a great idea, and it's actually partly why on the 14th we identified in that category. Let's have a very intentional discussion about how to do that input, what it means and what we do with the input, and then talk about that engagement on the whole sphere of engagement. And we'll kind of come in prepared for what those ways might be for you to discuss and give us some guidance on. Chair, anything else we should focus on before letting you all get to food?
No,
and
I spoke my piece.
Box wine.
No, I'm looking ahead to the 14th.
I can watch Joe losing weight as we speak.
That's just a background picture, Joe, so go mute yourself again.
No, sir.
All right, we've started the comedy routine, Marilee. You better save us.
There you go. Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Have a
please
good rest of your evening.
adjourn this thing now.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for bringing your senses of humor.